Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, it's really brilliant to be here today for Directors UK. I'm thrilled to be talking to Elizabeth Lowe, director of the amazing You've Got to See It film Mistress Dispeller. My name's Jeanie Finlay. I'm a filmmaker who makes films all over the world. I'm based in Nottingham. I'm right now in Broadway Cinema. Elizabeth, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Elizabeth Lowe. So nice to meet you, Jeannie.
Well, I am so thrilled when I was asked to have this conversation with you because I loved the film. I've been telling everybody about it. It's one of those films that you want to, I go weight training. I like starting the day by lifting heavy weights, and I have been telling the people that I weight lift with about the film because it's one of those films. So let's start just at the beginning. For those people in the audience who haven't seen the film, can you just give
Mhm.
us two lines about what the film is? And then I just really want to know, like, how does this film exist? Let's go from the kernel of the idea,
Yeah.
and how did you pursue that into making a feature film?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that organic spread word of mouth. So the film is titled Mistress Dispeller, which is it basically explores this new industry in China that's only 10 years old, where there's a service called Mistress Dispelling, where if you discover that your spouse is cheating on you, instead of directly confronting your spouse, you can hire a service that usually is a woman who will infiltrate your family's life under a false identity and meet your husband or your partner and their mistress, and under that false identity sort of gain their trust and their confidence, and through that influence them to end the affair, seemingly of their own accord. And so the film is this Rashomon of a love triangle in which we're shifting perspectives from the wife to the husband and finally to the mistress, so that you're seeing sort of this crumbling love story as it's being broken apart and mended from all three angles.
I love that, a modern Rashomon of
Yeah.
emotional sort of devastation. I mean, I saw this described as the ultimate how did they make it film. And
Mm.
so, yeah, how did it become a film? How did you get the access? And how upfront were you with everyone that appears in screen at the beginning? Because I think that the access is, it's absolutely extraordinary. So, like, take us on that journey. Tell us about this, how this came to life.
Thank you. So when I first read about the mistress spelling phenomenon, I thought, this could only be a fiction film because who would expose their lives in this way? But it
Mm.
was really when I was working with my China-based producer, Maggie Lee, who's incredible at getting access to things. We scouted sort of dozens of real mistress dispellers who are working in China, and we met with them. And Teacher Wang, who is in the film, she was the only one who, on day one of our scouting trip, enabled us to film a husband and a wife and a mistress at the tail end of a case already to be on camera. And I was so struck by how seeing each of them and engaging with each of them was so moving to me unexpectedly,
Mm.
where I felt my empathy sort of expand to each of these figures, some of which are usually maligned in a love triangle, that, I thought if she can get us access to her clients to be on camera, then we have a film here. But I will say that our goal was then to, authentically document a case from beginning to end from all three perspectives. And that
Mm.
was very difficult. And it took us 3 years of following Teacher Wang, filming with multiple cases, parts of cases, or, parts of the process before we finally ended up with Mr. and Mrs. Lee, who are the heart of the film that you see. And the reason, so, deception is such a big part of mistress dispelling.
Mm.
So, while the wife knew what we were doing, the husband and mistress, Fei Fei, couldn't have known what the film was about. And they were approached by Teacher Wang's business partner to be in a film more broadly about modern love and relationships in China. And that's what they had agreed to at first. But my producer, Emma Miller, and I knew that we had to handle this, issues of transparency from an ethical perspective as filmmakers. And so what we built into that production plan was that by the end of the 4 months of filming with them, which is the typical length it takes to sort of quote unquote dispel a case or resolve a case, at the end of that, they would all understand what Teacher Wang's role was in their lives, and have a chance to pull out if they wanted to. And then, even further on after that, we would then travel back to China and show each of them a cut of the film, separately, so that they could sort of review their portrayals within the film, fully grasp what Wang had done, on a visual basis, and have the opportunity again to either reconsent to being a part of the project, or they could drop out. And we were prepared to allow them to drop out because we had these 3 years of material with other cases and also other love industries that we filmed across China, including, divorce lawyers, dating camps, speed dating, matchmaking, that we could weave together a more sort of essayistic film about love in China if they withdrew their consent. But I'm very grateful that at that end of that process, Mr. and Mrs. Lee and Fei Fei, the mistress, still agreed to remain featured, which again speaks to how generous and unself-conscious they are as human beings, which was very rare. And I don't take that for granted. And you can see it in sort of how vulnerable they're willing to be on camera.
I'm really excited to hear you talk about your willingness to withdraw them from the film if that was something that they would would not let go along with. I mean, I practice what I describe as non-binary consent in my filmmaking, because films
Yeah.
last a long time. I
Yeah.
guess by that, what I mean is that consent is negotiated all along. You
Yeah.
keep checking in, is this okay? Is this okay?
Yeah.
And then also the offer to leave is often the thing that will allow you to stay. When I made Seahorse about Freddie McConnell, who's a trans guy who gave birth, like I was given permission to film the birth as long as I would leave at
Mm.
any point, no questions asked, if my being there got in the way of the birth. And
Yeah.
my promise to leave ultimately gave me access to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think
it's terrifying for people.
totally. I think that might be a similar case in which basically, all our participants only agreed to a few days of filming. That's all they committed to. And so we always treated every single day that we filmed with them as if it could be our last, because it's often unpredictable. And there were cases that dropped out over those 3 years that we filmed with. And so it was very stressful, over those 4 months, or, the entire 3 years, where this access is a constant negotiation, especially because we're dealing in such sensitive territory, like about people's families, and their families are at stake and their privacy. Yeah, it was
So how did you know that this couple and Mistress were the correct triangle to, what was it about them that made you go, we found them, this is it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so I will say they were the couple that we got the deepest access with, the only couple that we really profiled from the beginning to end. And a big reason for that relates to the access question. It's, do you remember the younger brother in the film? He's in some of
Yeah.
the initial scenes. He's sort of by the wife all the time. So he was actually a male mistress, a mister, I suppose, that we had filmed with 2 years prior to production, where he himself was being dispelled by Teacher Wang, the Mistress Dispeller. And having undergone that process and still remained friends with Teacher Wang, which he often does, when his older sister came to him and said, my husband is cheating on me. What do I do? I want to save my family. I don't want to, have it break apart. he says, I have the perfect solution for you. I had this great experience with this film crew. They were
Oh my
harmless and
God.
lovely. And also, more importantly, Teacher Wang, the Mistress Dispeller, is somebody who is like a magician who will make your problem go away. And so, with that sort of pre-existing vouch of approval and trust from a
Mm,
trusted relative for her, Mrs. Lee had a lot of confidence in both us and also the Mistress Dispeller. So there was that we didn't have with other
mm,
couples from the very beginning. And then in terms of why they were chosen, I remember, at the end of our shoot, because they were the last 4 months of a 3-year shoot, I showed, well, our editor, who's brilliant, her name is Charlotte Munch-Bengtsson, and she's Danish, and she's worked on films like All That Breathes, which was an Oscar-nominated film.
oh my God, I am
Yeah.
obsessed with that
Truffle
film.
Hunters, Truffle Hunters. I don't know if you've seen that. It's incredible
Yes, of
film
course
too.
I've seen
Yeah,
that
and
film.
she's yeah,
It's
and she's
so good.
She's so good. So she's amazing. And
Mm,
she also worked on The Act of Killing. So she took 2 weeks to look at all our footage that we had collected over 3 years. And she said to me, she was like, I have a proposal for you. I don't think we should even try to interweave the other couples into this couple's story, which, because this couple is sacred, what you've captured here. And if you try to juxtapose them against the other couples that you don't have as deep access with,
mm.
it will just dilute and hurt all their stories. And I agreed completely because it was kind of returning to the original seed of the idea of a Rashomon. But of course, I was tempted by these other couples and cases that we had filmed with where we had incredible material. But I will say that some of the other couples that we filmed with, for example, there was a man, a husband, who, in one scene was sort of denying that he was having an affair to his wife. And I'm filming them. And a few hours later, I'm in another room with him and he's making a move on his mistress physically in front of me. And I'm still recording. And in an instance like that, I'm, shocked by, wondering what is he thinking is happening and why is he behaving in this way?
Mm.
Despite the cameras rolling. And that was so alienating to me in terms of like how far gone his moral compass had gone, that he was not the kind of character that I wanted to build our story around because the initial impetus for me was always to find a love triangle in which each corner was in some ways relatable to the audience. So you could stay curious and not judgmental about why they were doing what they were doing.
I think it's absolutely the Rashomon element of it is that you are absolutely embedded in their POV and you find and build empathy for everyone on the sides of the triangle. It's so important. I'm so sort of glad that your editor, what was your editor's name?
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's such a good call. That sort of purity of being in that
yeah,
relationship just makes it feel so pure
totally.
and just so exciting to watch. I'm sort of, I mean, it leads on to a question. I don't usually write questions. I've written questions today. This feels very unusual for
You.
me, but just thinking about this, like I'm deep in the edit at the moment. You might be able to hear the whirring of a hard drive because Nicole, my editor, is working on the other side of the room right now because we're approaching picture lock. And
Congratulations.
thank you if we get there. I sort of feel like making films sometimes is like the pain of childbirth. You forget how much it hurts to deliver.
Mhm.
Not
Yeah.
to like stretch a metaphor, but it's like you have to forget the pain, otherwise you wouldn't do it again. And it's so
100%.
rewarding.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've always sort of agreed with, and I'd be interested to know whether this is an insight that relates to your practices. I feel like the filming is about instinctively moving through the world. I think very carefully about the people that I put in front of a camera.
Mhm.
And also, sometimes I'm just like trying to feel the film, and it sounds like you were doing that in all of this other diverse
Yeah.
filming. And often, the moments you see are the momentum of those 3 years of filming, or the film I'm
Mhm.
making at the moment. I filmed for 4 years. There's a weight of that 4 year
Yeah.
discovery that, and then even if you're filming in the last moments, there's the weight of that. But the thing that I'm sort of experiencing at the moment is that sometimes the true meaning of the film is revealed to me in the edit, because that's the
Mhm.
moment where you get to write the film. I've discovered that I'm making a film about grief, and now I've sort of discovered that it's absolutely obvious to me. I'm making a film about grief and what it means to lose everything overnight and how you deal with that in the world. Um, I'm interested with this film. What were the lessons that the edit taught you about why you were making this film? And was it what you initially set out to make? How did it change through all of those complex processes of finding lots of people over 3 years?
Yeah, that's such a profound question, and I'm so glad that you've reached that with your film. With this film, I think going into it, it was, you know, this, being drawn to the gray areas of life in which
Mm,
people are acting in ethically murky ways,
mhm,
whether it's the Mistress Dispeller or, the people in their marriage or the mistress. And, at first, it just seemed like this strange spectacle where it's about this profession that most of us have never heard of and getting this incredibly rarefied access
mm,
through this person whose job it is to break up affairs and the relationships that she builds with her clients. Um, and I was drawn in initially, I think, as a storyteller because I had just made. So I feel like every film that I make is in reaction to the previous film I made. And with the first film that I made, it was called Stray, and it was this film that sort of takes place in Turkey, and it's told entirely from the perspective of a street dog as she wanders through Istanbul. Um,
mm,
and there's no real narrative there because she's a stray dog, and she has no job, no family, no ties to anything. So her life was sort of just not very non-linear and meandering. And I think in react and it was a beautiful experience to film that, but in reaction to that, I wanted to sort of find a story that hewed more closely to sort of classical storytelling models. And I think you know what I loved about this, watching a case unfold, and especially the couple that we ended up finding, is that as I was sort of like filming them and going through the edit, I discovered that all three of them are on these really classically heroic arcs in which
mm,
they each have to overcome some kind of trial and tribulation and see whether they can like discover within themselves that elixir that can get attain their goal. And for the wife, she had to set aside her pride to save her family and bite her tongue and go along with this ploy of with the Mistress Dispeller to try to save that. And then the husband is forced to confront the fork in the road that he's in his life, where he has to choose between his commitment
mm,
and his love for his family versus his desire and the happiness he was deriving from this relationship with an external party. And then the mistress, I think, over the course of those 4 months, really had to discover her own self-worth, and reflection about what she wants from life in order to potentially extricate herself from that a shadowy relationship that's not complete. And so I really, as a storyteller, have so much admiration for what all three of them have gone through, whether you agree with their choices that they have made or not, whether it's the husband choosing to stay or the wife choosing to stay, or Feifei exiting potentially. And so that for me has been what I've really gleaned from this, that, despite the circumstances that people are in, and despite how being human is just messy, the
mm,
desires that we have in middle age and when love fades, what we need to keep feeling alive. I think it's difficult to judge those things. And I think people's responses to that, at least in the film that we ended up making in the edit, is that they are trying to do what's best for even a greater good in their minds, which is the family unit. And for better or for worse, they try to attain that, and I have a deep respect for that. And it's made me sort of think a lot about one's own approach to love and life. And I think there's different models by which you can sort of think through that, and especially being on the film festival circuit and having these different audience questions come at me
Mm.
all reveal their sort of cultural baggage and their own expectations for what they believe is the right path in life. So in the West, I've noticed people will often ask, why did the husband stay? And why did the wife stay? Why would they? And when it's clear that they're not happy and they've been betrayed or they're doing the betraying. And then in the East, I've noticed it's kind of seen as a given how things progress in the film. And what I see there in the gap is this difference between a culture on the West that's perhaps more individualistic, where the pursuit of your personal happiness is really important. And then on the East, on the Eastern side, it's this assumption that sacrificing yourself for the greater good, in this case, the family, is much more expected. And and seeing those two divergent sort of like approaches. And I still don't know, what is the better path and what leads to more happiness in the long run. I don't have answers for that, but I think that question is brewing in my mind throughout having gone through this journey of editing the film and releasing it too. And yeah,
Um,
I think at the end of the day, people don't have the answers to love, and I still don't from behind the camera. But I think every stage of life reveals something different.
of course,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. I mean, it's very much a film about a place as well, and I'm interested in what you as a director brought to that. I've read that you grew up in Hong Kong, and the film was an opportunity to learn more about mainland China. But what were the surprises, or what was that discovery? What did you hope to find? What did you find?
Yeah, it feels like every film that I make is like with my first film, it was this discovery of a country and a culture completely alien and foreign to my own. And it was so revelatory to learn
Mm,
about their interspecies relationships where dogs are allowed to roam freely throughout their city. Um, and so with this film, I wanted to get to know mainland China because I'm from Hong Kong, and obviously its presence is growing in my own city. And love felt like the most intimate seams by which to get to know someone and to get to know regular people in the heartland of China living very regular lives and how they live their lives. And through this case, I feel like what I discovered is that, and I think this is a universal issue, and it's partly why I wove in sort of those larger societal vignettes that you see different love industries where you have like a parental marriage market where your desirability as a husband or wife is tied to whether you have a mortgage or not, or
mm,
a matchmaking facility that basically suggests that, your dateability as a woman, your value on the dating market decreases as you get older, and how challenging that kind of environment and rhetoric is to exist in as a human being. When love and your lovability is tied to a market type of ideology. And so what I discovered is that in China, those kinds of dynamics may be heightened, and maybe more overtly sort of, said aloud.
mm,
But I do think that that is an issue that is sort of it's preventing connection around the world. I know that dating is very difficult, like from friends around the world. It's really challenging. And alienation in modernity is so prevalent, and that's partly why I expand out to show these, urban landscapes that speak to that kind of loneliness that people are operating within to sort of, yeah, understand why our characters are making the choices that they are. And that's what I discovered as I was wandering through China.
Were there specific challenges to actually lifting a camera in China to
So
make the film?
So I'm a Hong Kong citizen, so I was allowed to very freely enter and exit China. Although actually no, because it was the pandemic, the peak pandemic years when we made this film. So every time I entered China, I had to go through like a 3-week quarantine in a government facility. So that was very tough, but I did feel like very privileged in that we were probably the only sort of like semi-foreign crew in China at the time
Mm,
making a film during these years, where it's so closed off to the rest of the world as it was dealing with COVID. Um, so that was the only difficulty. But otherwise, this is not an overtly political film. So
mm,
we were not sort of constrained in that way,
yeah.
only in terms of moving through the pandemic and
Oh
getting
God,
tested every day.
3 week
And hoping that you were not
quarantine.
positive. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, one of the things that I'm interested in filmmaking in general, I had an interesting when I was talking to Shiroi Ito about Black Box Diaries. You know, we touched on mental health supervision in filmmaking. I work very deeply with Rebecca Day at Film in Mind and have a mental health supervisor on
Oh,
the
wow.
film to protect me and the people in front of and the people behind the camera. And I just
Yeah.
wonder whether that's something that you've been able to accommodate, or if not, how do you protect the softness in your story? I think our challenge as
Mhm.
directors is to remain soft in a tough world and a tough industry.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. And unfortunately, we did not have sort of formal mental health services as we were approaching these love stories and trying to document these cases. And I will say, like, over those 3 years, I think, for someone like Maggie, my Chinese producer,
Mm,
witnessing case after case of this kind of betrayal, and there's no real rhyme or reason or pattern to how this happens. Um, it's made her slightly sort of maybe cynical or disbelieving in love. And even myself, as I was making this film, partly, you know, under the influence of the Mistress Dispeller in some ways, the seeds that she planted in my mind. I had a relationship sort of fall apart from, an engagement fall apart as I was filming this people's struggle in their own love from behind the camera. My own was, breaking apart. And it was kind of like one of those moments where you kind of just steel yourself and you're like, okay, I may be going through my own engagement falling apart. And I'm filming, like scenes of people get, those scenes of engagement photo shoots, but also people who are in dating camps searching for love and unable to, and, people in marriages struggling to even communicate on such a basic level with each other. It was one of those moments where it was very humbling, where I felt, wow, even from behind the camera can sometimes feel like this buffer
hmm
where you're just observing other people as some kind of objective outsider. But in
Yeah.
this instance, we're all figuring out our own personal lives too, as we're filming people in their search for love. That it was very humbling, and it really put me. It really increased my compassion and solidarity with people and their difficulty in finding love and keeping love. And it was a lot to sort through, but I think we just sort of powered through it and processed
Awesome.
and processed it years after. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
How did she plant a seed? I'm fascinated.
Yeah. So I actually talk about this in this New York Times Modern Love episode I did about the journey of making Mistress Dispeller in more detail. But sort of long story short, she kind of, I think I just sort of told her sort of the story of how I met my ex at the time. And she sort of diagnosed it instantly that it was in some ways like an unequal relationship, or a relationship that would not last and stand the test of time uh, because the dedication or maybe commitment wasn't there. And I think in planting that seed, it was always in the back of my mind, so that when things got rough, 3 years into production and in my own relationship, uh, it made me more sort of trigger happy to end things and and sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy of what she had predicted 3 years prior.
Wow, she's the true Mistress
Yeah.
Dispeller. It's
Yeah. And
incredible.
for a long time there was a lot of resentment on my part. I'm like, how did I let her get under my skin in the way she does with her clients? I mean, but I think that's part of documentary filmmaking. Like you said, we have to remain soft to
Mm,
be open to our participants,
hmm
you're human. So it's impossible to not be affected, even if
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
camera's there between you.
This morning I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw your New York Doc NYC Visionaries
Oh,
speech from last night. Congratulations on winning the Visionaries Award at Doc NYC. And what a beautiful, moving speech. I really loved what you had to say when you talked about, cinema verite, Robert Drew talking about picture logic rather than word logic and how that applied to your films. And I'd love you just to expand on that because I'd not heard that quote before and it really sort of touched me. And yeah, I just thought, oh, that is an idea I want to hear more about. How does it apply to the films that you make?
yeah, no, I mean, what he said that, documentaries should hew to a picture logic over a word logic, and that is what is their potential, the promise of documentary filmmaking. Um, that really moved me, and I think naturally, even prior to learning about, his philosophy and how he revolutionized documentary filmmaking and invented direct cinema, basically, with his companions. Um, I've always been drawn to a more nonverbal form of filmmaking in which the interview is not so much used to sort of like tell people how to feel or what to think about someone's biography or their life story, but even when interview is used, it's used in an emotional way in which that itself is a scene of action. And I think for me, one of the issues that I do really, really care about, as you can tell from my first film, which is, sort of showing a feature film length film about the life of a stray dog, is animal rights. And I think cinema has that potential to expand our sort of empathy for beings who maybe are nonverbal and move through the world in a way that is both familiar and totally unknown to us as
Mm.
different species. And I think cinema has that promise because it is this language of what you see and also what you hear and so I think for me it really resonates. And with bringing this to the film, like a film like Mistress Dispeller, it's shot mostly for the most part purely observationally, in which I'm not directing anyone what to do, and you're just there as a witness to these intimate scenes in people's homes as they're grappling with something so difficult in their lives. And for me, I wanted to use that approach because from what I witnessed in Teacher Wang's work, so much of it is just one line of dialogue elicits another line, elicits another line, and eventually gets you to where the Mistress Dispeller wants her clients to be, where they're either confessing or opening up, or their mind is changed in this subtle way. And I wanted audiences to be able to witness that. And by not, Charlotte and I, we didn't cut. We tried to avoid as many cuts as possible in these long conversations because we wanted you to be able to feel like you were watching an authentic scene, like a play organically unfold where there's minimal manipulation from the filmmaker's hand. So you could believe in it and also you could really witness the work that's being done and the way that people's minds change in subtle ways in front of the camera. And so I think that to me was really fascinating about the mistress dispelling phenomenon, what I was able to witness. And I wanted the camera to capture that for audiences, to put them in the room in the way that I was in awe of what was happening.
Well, I mean, what role do you think? I think sometimes when you lift a camera, things change. They have to, even if you're observing, the idea of fly on the wall to me is, I mean, I did an interview. I think the headline that came out was like, "I'm not a fly. I take up too much room." I'm 5'7", 5'9" in these shoes. Um, I'm not a fly, and I sort of feel like the intervention of a human in a space with a camera changes things. But I'm always what I'm showing you is a relationship, but I'm interested in this more sort of stood back verite filming. What role do you think the camera does? Does it enable conversations to happen that might not have happened? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I'd
I
love to know a bit more
completely,
about that.
yeah. No, I completely agree with you and think that that's a really like an astute question, especially in a film like this. So I will say in terms of production, um, because the scenes would unfold in such we were unpredictable ways, we didn't know how the clients would react to Teacher Wang's orchestrations and manipulations. Um, we would always set up two cameras in the room. And then
Mm.
once we figured out where the conversation was taking place, hit record. And because it's designed with this stillness, the crew would be able to leave the rooms so that we're not there physically. So that at least you don't have physical eyes peering in at you as you're going through these sensitive,
Oh,
vulnerable moments of your life.
are you monitoring?
I'm monitoring from afar, but
Oh
remotely.
my
We're not
goodness.
in the room. So most of the scenes that you see in the film were never in the room. However, I know that at the end of shooting, Teacher Wang did say, had the cameras not been there, while the overall arc of the case might have flowed in the same direction, the tenor would be so different. And because the cameras were there, what you're basically seeing is these people they're very aware they're being filmed. So they are trying to be their best selves. They're trying to perform their best selves despite the circumstances they're in. And that is constantly competing with their perhaps messier, darker emotions occasionally creeping up and cracking through that facade or that image of themselves that they want to project. And I find that fascinating as a human being and as a documentarian to watch that is what the film is, that constant negotiation happening on screen. And I do think the camera also, so I never direct people what to say or do on my film sets. And but the simple presence of the camera, I think, became an allowance for the characters, like the wife, to suddenly reminisce about what happened in their youth with her husband in a way
Mm.
that she never probably would in the decades that they've been together. But the camera gave her license to do that. And I think camera is both sort of it both represses people, but it also is a catalyst for them to be their best selves. And so I think what ends up happening is that they're so conscious of being in a film that is going to be consumed internationally, because one of the conditions upon which they agreed to be in the film was that the film would never be publicly released in China, but they knew it would be
Mm.
consumed abroad. And so I think a part of them did feel almost this burden that they're representing Chinese people, which of course it shouldn't be that way, but they felt that they did not want to they didn't want China to come across in this negative light. Um, and and that's part of that's there. And so they're digging deep, sort of like reaching past all the bullshit, the pettiness, the jealousies, and trying to come up with something deep inside of them that is something greater. And I think that's really actually beautiful, even if it's not how they would have operated had cameras not been there and they were more thoughtless in their actions and what they said.
So the camera becomes a tool of bravery. Um,
And being your best self
yeah,
and acting with generosity and dignity.
I love that. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, the presence of a camera is always, sometimes it means that people can have the conversation that they may not have, it just may never have happened. Or it
Yeah.
can be, I know what I've experienced is that sometimes people use me as a sounding board for the people that they know will see the film. So it's
Um,
like it's a way of having an indirect conversation with
yeah.
someone.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
With
So,
another character in the film that's
yes.
in their life. Oh
Yeah.
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 Yeah. In our case, it wasn't like that because throughout like the 4 months, we teacher Wang, the Mistress Dispeller, actually wanted us to keep our sort of direct heart to hearts with them to a minimum. So we were only very friendly when we were filming with them, but we never had, deep conversations. It was always small talk because she didn't want us to sort of like spill the beans or disrupt the Mistress Dispelling process inadvertently. So we actually only had our heart to hearts with them at the very end of filming when
Mm.
they finally understood everything that was happening. And especially in that master interview where we got to get a sense of what they were thinking and feeling that whole time about the film and each other.
And how did they react to the finished film when they saw it?
Yeah, people always ask that, and I wish my answer was less mundane, but they actually were all praising the cinematography, the editing, the storytelling, and the hard work that we put into it, which again, I think is sort of a testament to the kinds of people that they are, but
Yeah.
also maybe hopefully they could see that in the edit, we really took care to protect them. People do, I think, tend to over reveal themselves when they're made comfortable, even in front of the camera, which we did. And Charlotte and I, we were very conscientious of not allowing them to hurt themselves within the film. Like if you extended, that one scene a minute or two longer, it might turn the audience against the husband forever, or even the mistress. And that was something we were very mindful of, that even our editing had to hew to this moral framework in which we're protecting them. They're giving us so much of their lives, but we are not going to overexpose them.
Yeah, you held them.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
held their stories.
And then I hope they sensed that, and that's why they were just focused on the craft.
I do sometimes think though that people are actually amazed that, oh, you made a film.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you go through the process, they know you're making a film, but then there's actually like, oh, it's
The
finished. Oh,
care.
it's got a
Yeah, yeah.
score.
You're totally right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The first film I made was about dogs, so I never got that opportunity as much, but you probably
Yeah, you didn't get the audience feedback.
Yeah.
The participant feedback. So we're just coming to the end of our conversation, but I'm interested in knowing like what's next for you, and also what are your sort of hopes for independent documentary right now? I mean, this is possibly the hardest question that I've given you, which is like, what role can independent documentary play right now in a world that is in chaos? And yeah, what are your hopes? What do you want to do next?
Um, for the first question, I hope to make my first fiction film next. We'll
Ooh,
see,
yeah.
fingers crossed, how and if that happens, just to flex a different creative muscle. And then in terms of my hope for independent documentary, we live in a very dark world right now. And you can see the way media consolidates around the powers that be. And while I don't, it's very rare for a documentary to have a tangible impact in the world, I think. I think on a spiritual level, they are these records and containers of perspectives and stories that sort of challenge the dominant narratives of the world. Um, and even if it takes 100 years for those ideas to finally take seed, at least while genocides are happening, or while people are getting expelled from countries, that the stories that the independent documentary filmmakers are collecting and gathering, and all of that footage of reality that's not reduced, because independent documentaries are allowed to be complex and messy and nuanced, because sometimes they're not answering to market forces, that those become sort of like spiritual containers for at least our soul, if even physically the powers that be roll over people endlessly, and it seems like nothing can stop them. Like that's how I feel like even about Stray, my first film. At the time I filmed in 2019, there were laws protecting stray dogs in Turkey to roam freely, but now the government has turned against those dogs, and they're rounding them up and killing them and imprisoning them. And so the film hasn't made a concrete difference to the dogs' lives, but I think a lot of Turkish people have reached out to me, and it's become this capsule of of a better time in history that no longer exists for the dogs. And I'm happy to have contributed to that, unknowingly.
That's a beautiful place to end. I wish you enormous luck with the continued like rolling out the film. Is there a website for the film? I'm sure it's going to be linked in the show notes or something.
Yeah, Oscilloscope is our indie distributor for the film in theaters, and so their website with Mistress Dispeller has information about where it's releasing. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, huge congratulations on the film. It's been a real joy to speak to you. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an incredible conversation. I can't wait to watch your films too.
Oh, thank you very much.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more directors in conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.